Hey y'all, this is Pastor Brian. Today is Thursday, the 6th of February, 2025, and this is our weekly midweek video. Talk about faith, life, something that's going on in the world. We do Bible study. We're in the season of doing a bunch of Bible study during these videos. We talked about this for the last several weeks. This is what's called the season after the Epiphany, which is a season of the church year after the celebration of Epiphany, where we tends to have some themes in the recommended scripture readings for the year, for this time of year, that have to do with the revealing of God's light, God showing up in our world, particularly in and through Jesus. And so I just thought we'd read some of those scriptures. They're good scripture passages. They are fun to read, and we're not reading these in worship. So we thought it would be a great chance to reflect on them together in these videos. We started last week a story in Luke chapter 4 that we divided into two. We're going to read the second half of that. I'm not going to promise I won't repeat some things from last week's video because I recorded it a week ago, and I don't actually recorded it 2 weeks ago. I had to record ahead because I was away last week, and so I can't promise to remember everything that I said 2 weeks ago. But we're reading the second part of the story. It's a different part of the story, and I'm excited about it. So this is from the Gospel according to St. Luke, chapter 4, beginning in verse 21. So far in the story, Jesus has showed up to his hometown, and he has preached. He said that he's reading from, he's in the synagogue, he's showing up, and he's reading from the book of Isaiah, and he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." This is what Isaiah says, and has anointed me to bring good news to the poor and release the captive. This is the year of Jubilee. We talked about this last week. And so so Jesus has said that, and then the first verse we're going to read is the last verse he said. We're kind of reading this one verse both weeks. The last thing he said was, "Today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." It's after he's read the scripture from Isaiah. He says, "Today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Basically, like, hey, look at me. I'm the fulfillment of what Isaiah was talking about. So we're going to start there. We're going to go for the rest of it. Then he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." The scripture about God releasing the captives and bringing justice. This is a hopeful scripture for the people of Israel. It sounds like God's promise is coming to them. God's liberation is coming to them. So all spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his mouth. They said, "Is this not Joseph's son?" He said to them, "Doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, 'Doctor, cure yourself,' and you will say, 'Do here in your hometown the things that we have heard you did at Capernaum.' And he said, 'Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. But the truth is, there were many widows in Israel in the time of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months, and there was a severe famine over all the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them, except to the widow at Zarephath in Sidon. There were also many with a skin disease in Israel at the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian.' When they heard this, all in the synagogue were filled with rage. They got up, they drove him out of the town, and they led him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so they might hurl him off the cliff. But he passed through the midst of them and went on his way." So this is huge. So Jesus reads this scripture that the people understand to be about their liberation from their Roman oppressors, and they're really excited. And they're like, "Yeah, man, look at this Jesus, man. He can preach. Oh my gosh, look. And it's fulfilled in him. Like, are we serious? Is he the Messiah? Is he coming to save us?" And then Jesus does this thing where he's like, "Let me tell you why this isn't about you." Which is like not a great way to win friends, which, Jesus is willing to challenge people. And Jesus says, like, "You've heard of the great things I've done in Capernaum and in other parts of the land. I need you to know that this isn't about you." It's basically what he says. And he tells these stories from the Old Testament. Elisha and Elijah. Elijah is the first of them. Elisha is like Elijah's successor. He's like Elijah's student. So Elisha has like the mantle passed down to him. Literally, there's a thing called a mantle that's passed down to him. But he becomes the lead prophet after his mentor Elijah dies. It's really confusing. Like, it would be great if they had names that had more of a difference than a j sound versus a sh sound. But Elijah and Elisha, they're these prophets in ancient Israel who are in constant conflict with the kings of Israel. They are resisting the kings of Israel, and they pronounce judgment on the people of Israel because of the injustice and the idolatry of the leaders of the people of Israel. And then there are these two stories of God being at work with foreigners, with this widow and with this foreign general who comes and is cleansed. Like, people who were the enemies of the people, God shows up for. And so Jesus saying that to people who are being oppressed by foreigners, like, that doesn't sound really great, Jesus. But what Jesus is doing is saying, like, God's grace is bigger than us. God's grace is bigger than our in-group. God's grace is for everyone. And this is a temptation that continues across history, and that, like, we see in our contemporary world, right? Like, people who think that they have a monopoly on God's grace, that they are the in-group and that they deserve to have all the power and the control, that God's grace should only be for them and for people who they choose to like. Jesus says, no. The grace of God is for all. And me coming here to proclaim liberation, I'm proclaiming liberation for you, and I'm also proclaiming liberation for your enemies. I'm proclaiming hope for you, and I'm also proclaiming hope for those who you hate. I'm proclaiming transformation for our community and also for all the other communities. Jesus comes to set everybody free, and that can be upsetting when he declares love for our enemies, right? I think it's pretty well known that America these days, like, it's pretty, at least, like, commonly said, that we have a problem with tribalism, right? We think that we're on this, like, only, like, the people who are like us, the people who agree with us, are the good guys, and that everyone else is the bad guys, right? And, like, I have some pretty strong opinions about, like, problematic things that are being done and groups of people who are spreading hatred in our society. But, like, the word Jesus offers is that they too are beloved, right? The people who are on the other side, quote unquote, right? The people who stand for what I find disgusting, for what I find hateful, right? The bigotries and the hatreds that we see in our world, like, the people who are spreading those things are beloved. And so they are called to love their, quote, enemies, and I am called to love my enemy, right? And here's the thing. Jesus says that, and it almost gets him killed, right? They drive him out of town. They try to throw him out off a cliff. He escapes. But the proclamation of radical love, including, like, for oppressed and for oppressor, for hated enemy, for folks who drive us crazy, for folks who we think are all wrong, for folks who we think is just the worst, like, it's not a way to get popular. And, these days, like, right, in our society, right, which is currently, like, targeting immigrants and refugees in some really problematic ways, saying, like, hey, those immigrants and those refugees, like, they are beloved by God. God's love and God's welcome is not just for me and the people like me, right? The rise and, many, like, white nationalist and racist groups that are kind of have grown to prominence in recent years. It is, saying that that is not the white nationalist alarm. That's just an alarm on my clock that went off. Sorry about that. It's not like, hey, white nationalism is bad, alarm, although that would be a good alarm to have. We need it. But, like, those groups need to be reminded, and, those groups are saying only certain people are beloved. And Jesus says, actually, no, the foreigners, the people you hate, are beloved. And he also says to me that those people who I find who are spreading hate are beloved, right? And that's the hard work of following Jesus, is figuring, how do we love the outcast and the marginalized, and how do we love those who we would consider enemies, and how do we love those who are doing evil, and how do we love those who are desperate for justice and mercy, and how do we love those who are spreading injustice? Like, the love of Christ is radical and all-encompassing. Every one of us is called to share it. Every one of us is called to trust in it and depend upon it. None of us can go without it. So Jesus shows up and he says, I am liberation. I, Jesus Christ, am liberation. I am hope. God's liberation is on the way. God comes to set you free, but it's not just for you. It's for the people you can't stand. It's for the people who you think are doing evil. It's for the people who are on the wrong side of history. God's liberation is for all, and we are called to join in that. And that's scary, it's overwhelming, and it can, being about that can get you in lots of trouble. But it's the good news that Jesus offers. Peace. You are loved.